Hey guys, we're going to talk about Ecosystems Ecology Part 1 today. This is day 16 in your notes. Just so you have a heads up on the schedule for tomorrow, we are going to go through over day 18 notes, so if you'd like to read those tonight once we're done with this lecture, that'll give you kind of a heads up. You won't necessarily know what the question is going to be, but it is on day 18 notes. Lots of the stuff in day 16 notes is review from 9th grade, from the ecology unit that we did in 9th grade. Not much is going to be new except for like the very end parts, so be prepared. Alright, so first of all we need to kind of see where we're at on the scale of things in biology. We've talked about populations being all of one species in one given area. To be a population, they have to be actively trying to reproduce with each other in the same place at the same time. We took a step up and went to populations, from populations to communities. In communities, we've started to add in other species that are interacting with that same population in the same area. We're going to go one step further today and start to talk about ecosystems. In an ecosystem, not only are you referring to the animals and the plant species that are present, but you've started to include the abiotic factors in the area. So abiotic meaning things that aren't necessarily alive. You've got energy flow that matters. You've got nutrients that matter, temperature and climate and water. So all of those things that aren't alive, hey Tig, but that are definitely part of a system. On your screen here, you can see we've got different trophic levels, and you've probably seen this as a food chain or a food web before. You can see down at the bottom, let me see if I can get my drawer on. There we go. We have our primary producers. That didn't draw, did it? Oh, just kidding. We won't do that. Okay, we have our I'm going to use my mouse instead of trying to draw. We have our primary producers down at the bottom. They're going to be all of our plants that actually produce some type of sugar or nutrient for us to consume, which is why we would then jump on consumers here. All of our primary producers are going to be considered autotrophs. Autotroph meaning that they make their own food. These are going to be made through photosynthesis. We've covered that already. Or chemosynthesis, but that's not quite as common. What are you doing? Honey, can you come get her? Our consumers are obviously going to be our heterotrophs, those that have to actually go to the grocery store and find food or hunt it down in the woods. You're going to have primary consumers and secondary consumers and tertiary consumers and so on and so forth. Most food chains can't support more than about 5 individuals, just because we're going to get there, but because you lose energy every round. You also have off to the side here decomposers, and decomposers are going to take whatever was final and the top of the food chain when it dies and recirculate it back into the population or back into the ecosystem so that it can be used again. They try and recycle as much as possible. You can see that all of our energy from the start came from the sun. The sun is the most functional piece of energy that we've got. We know that from the second law of thermodynamics that energy is never created or destroyed, it's just simply transformed. And so as we go through each level, you'll see how the energy is going to change as we go on. Some is lost. You'll see heat loss is a big part of our ecosystem and our trophic levels as we go through. In fact, we know that all energy is going to find itself searching for disorder as we transfer energy. So as we go, the sun is going to be the most ordered part of our ordered type of energy. It's the most efficient, but as we get up to the top, we've got less and less efficient animals as we go. Dee. She's a freak. All right. Now, the 10% rule is going to state that 10% of the energy that's eaten, or 10%, 10% of the energy from one trophic level will actually be available in the next trophic level. 80% of it is used up to keep the animal alive, and another 10% of that 90 is given off as waste. That would be your bathroom habits. This is a big deal when you start looking at pyramids like this. You can see you have 1 million joules of sunlight. Lots of people can't really wrap their head around joules, and because most people don't think like chemistry. You could think of this as calories. So if you have 1 million calories, your primary producers are only going to get about 10,000 from that, and be able to turn that around and offer that up to the next level, which is a grasshopper. Your grasshopper can eat all that grass and still only get about 1,000 calories from it. So then if we go up another level to our secondary consumers, little mouse here, he can only get 100 calories from eating that grasshopper. And then if the snake eats the mouse, which you can see him hanging out of his mouth right there, he's only going to get 10 calories from that mouse because the mouse has used up most of the energy that he actually received from the primary consumer. So it's a pretty big deal when you start thinking about adding another level above this. You're getting 1 calorie. So it really doesn't make a lot of sense to have much more than about 5 in a row. We'll get into the recycling of nutrients tomorrow on day 18, so we won't go too much into that, but just know that it happens. All right, primary production. This is something you probably haven't talked about as much. Primary production, you're going to start with what our global energy budget is, and we know that all energy comes from the sun. Only about 1% of the energy that our Earth receives is used to actually fund, I guess, photosynthesis. Most of the photosynthesis that goes on most of the energy that comes in is going to be either reflected back or absorbed into the water. We know that because of water's specific heat, it can absorb a lot of energy before it actually starts changing states of matter. We know that the greenhouse effect, because of that reflection of the sun, is going to contribute to our higher temperatures on Earth, and we know that because of the specific heat of Earth, our waters serve as heat banks for the other side of the planet when it's dark, when we don't have the sun up on our side. We can get into the productivity of Earth. This is a really good map to kind of wrap your head around. We talked last lecture that was online about, I believe it was Monday night, about how the number of animal and plant species change as we move from the equator to either north or south in both directions, and you can see that the most productive areas are right there around the equator. The least productive areas, those that are white or purple, are at the Arctic Circle, way up top, or way down low, either one. So you can see that it definitely plays a part in what's going on the planet. Your ability to kind of fund your ecosystem is limited the farther north or south that you go. So that brings us to gross primary production. This is the amount of energy that's produced before any of that energy is used by the plant itself. So how much do we actually produce, period? It's about 170 billion tons of sugar a year. That's a lot when you think of actual molecules of glucose. Now, we can't really take our gross primary production and use that as a workable number because we know that plants actually need some of that energy to keep themselves alive and to grow and to build their own tissues. So we actually use the number that's denoted as net primary production. This is the energy that's going to be left over after the plant has made sure that it's going to stay alive. We call that self-preservation. That's represented by R. So there is a math equation you can do here. It's net primary production is going to equal your gross minus your R. So you have to take away whatever is used up as life or self-preservation as just daily functioning of the plant. Let's see. Biomass, that's just another word that gets thrown around here in ecology. Biomass is simply the dry weight of whatever organism you're talking about. So the dry weight of a blue whale is going to be much more significant than the dry weight of, say, a grasshopper. So you're going to get way more biomass as you move up in the chains usually. Eutrophication, this is kind of a negative of ecology. This is the blocking off or the choking off of oxygen from a body of water, usually due to a large algal bloom. Algae is really bad about that. It forms kind of in sheets, and it can block the ability to dissolve oxygen in the water, so that's a big problem. There's a book that's been written about it called Silent Spring. Her name was Rachel Carson. This happens a lot, at the mouth of the Mississippi River down in New Orleans. All of the runoff that's pushed into the Mississippi River through the Midwest farmland will come out right there at the New Orleans mouth of the Mississippi. So it can really destroy some of the fish populations and the plants that are present there because of all of that extra phosphorus and nitrogen that's present in fertilizers and pesticides and things like that. Now, how do we look at biomass in the way that an animal actually sustains life when it's taken in some materials? This is our nice little caterpillar here. Of the 200 joules of energy that he's getting, or we could say calories if that makes more sense to you, 100 of them are going to exit as feces. So they'll go straight through his body through digestion. About 67 of them are going to be used up excuse me, as fuel for cellular respiration to make sure our cells are functioning the way they're supposed to give us ATP to run certain cellular processes and certain bodily functions that are sustainable to life. And then a small percentage is going to actually go to supporting the growth of this organism. Now, if you know anything about caterpillars, you know that they're going to go through a metamorphosis. Some of them are going to turn into butterflies, so you can imagine that this number is going to go up. These two numbers will go up during that time because there won't be any feces being produced. So you've got to consider the organism as well. Now, energy pyramids, these are pretty important. We've already seen this one. This is just showing you how the 10% rule plays out. I think I've got another one here. This is kind of a cool one. I wrote a paper on this in grad school. I had to convince my teacher why it was more beneficial for the earth and ecology to be a vegetarian. And I could have used this picture alone and been sufficient. If you look over here, this is the traditional diet of humans. The corn is then fed to the cattle, and then the human eats a nice hamburger or steak for dinner. Notice how many levels we have here, 3. So you had this original amount of energy from corn, but the cow only received 10%. Well then, if you then in turn eat the cow, you only get 10% of the cow. So your amount of energy is very, very thin. However, if you were a vegetarian and you just ate the corn and didn't bother with little cow over here, you would get a much larger portion of that energy. Part of my paper was to say that we would kind of end world hunger. Here's Miss Oklahoma here. If I was ever asked that question, what would you do? I would end world hunger by asking everyone to be a vegetarian for a couple days a week. It'd be that easy. You wouldn't have to cut it out completely, but if you had 2 or 3 vegetarian meals a week, you could really feed some starving people because we wouldn't need nearly as much corn to feed our cattle. Now, the cattle farmers would throw a fit, so you'd have to find some way to make them happy, but they can get glad in the same pants they got mad, I guess. Now, this is a pyramid of biomass. Again, that's the dry weight of an organism. Now on land, it's going to look like an actual pyramid because you're going to have all of that grass, all of those plants, those primary producers are going to have a lot more biomass than, say, the primary consumers, which might be insects, and then the secondary consumers, which might be, I don't know, a cat of some kind or a bird. Oh, excuse me, I didn't mean to switch it yet. And then the final one being a larger predatory bird or something like that. You're going to have a lot more of a pyramid shape. However, when you get down to aquatic biomes, it looks a little wonky because you're going to have phytoplankton, which is your primary producers here, that get eaten by things like blue whales or really large fish. And so they are going to have kind of this upside down pyramid because the biomass of a blue whale is going to be much more substantial than the biomass of the phytoplankton. So just keep that in mind. If they show you this picture and say, formulate an opinion as to where this ecosystem might exist, you would know that that would have to be an aquatic biome somewhere. The last one is a pyramid of numbers. This is just another way to kind of show you why the 10% rule has to be there. You can look at the number of species that might be present in their primary producers box here. It's going to be close to almost 6 million. And then how many species are present as primary consumers? Again, almost 10% there. And then again, the secondary consumers, you're dropping a little bit more, and then you can only support so many tertiary consumers with this amount of primary producers, which is why you have to have a certain amount of farmland to support a certain number of cows. You can't just pack 1,000,000 cows into one little pasture and expect everybody to get enough food. So it's kind of a play on the 10% rule, but nothing super significant. All right, well, that was it for day 16. It's pretty self-explanatory. You can read through it yourself. Again, tomorrow we're doing day 18. We'll have a synthesis question, and then we have a quick little kind of arts and crafts activity for you. You're going to draw some comics for me to study from on day 18. So have a good night, and I'll see you tomorrow.